Vumvalimo turned 1-year-old this last November 26. Since then, the 1-90 series chronicling her journey throughout the galaxy has reached 47 episodes. While she attained level 90 and Ace pilot status with Corsac by the 11th episode after roughly 45 hours of play, the series continued as a showcase of what Star Wars Galaxies, in SWG Legends specifically, has to offer players in a galaxy far, far away. Since the series started, my YouTube channel has received 550 new subscribers and nearly 260 new followers on Twitch who wanted to see Vum live. Thank you to everyone who has supported me this far and to those who may be joining us now. As a birthday celebration for Vum, I decided to take time and reflect on the 1-90 series and answer some questions from you all. With that out of the way, let's go into my reflections first. The goal of the 1-90 series was to encourage people to try or return to SWG Legends. This video series had to meet 3 requirements in order to meet that goal. The first requirement was to be entertaining. If the 1-90 series was boring, then no one would watch it, and then it wouldn't have any effect on their decision whether to return to or try the game themselves. Overall feedback for the series has been positive, so I like to think that I met this requirement for some viewers. Requirement 2 was to demonstrate what makes the SWG questing experience special. In my opinion, SWG questing stands out due to the early gearing potential, buffing potential, and variety of builds in the game. These are why I ultimately chose to level an officer over other professions. That and officers felt like a profession that would be a newer perspective for many players, even experienced ones, as most people often recommend to level something like Jedi or Commando instead. Officer also sounded like the most fun to me personally, as I already knew that I enjoyed the officer profession and haven't leveled 1-90 myself before this series. I feel the 1-90 series puts on a good display of SWG's unique questing experience, as the early gearing let me complete a lot of content at a good pace, buffing up let me solo a lot of content traditionally intended for groups, and I did this all with a less common build for officers, a profession not typically associated with solo and group content. Requirement 3 was to provide tips for new and returning players when they would need those tips. So for example, I would recommend preferred options and key bindings after you make your character, or I would go over how to navigate the bazaar and getting buffed once I landed in Mos Eisley, or I'd talk about how armor works and where to get it once you're level 22 and can equip armor, or I would tell you where to quest at certain points of the game, like when you're level 40 and not sure where to go next. The 1-90 series was successful here, as other players have mentioned the information that I provided in some of the videos to help guide them to the content they want to do, or help them navigate or understand the game's mechanics better. The one main point of improvement I would note is the Corsac piloting section. I definitely needed more patience and to lay down a structure of presentation before just going into piloting, as I never really went over specifically how to acquire and use droid commands effectively, as I leaned on multi-boxing with alts to complete some missions that I was getting stuck on or speed things up a little bit. I worked to resolve this though during the Storm Squadron section in the series, which had a much better presentation and step-by-step process of not only skilling up as a pilot, but also gearing up at each appropriate stage. So after talking about these 3 requirements, did I meet the goal? Yes. Some viewers have left comments, told me on Twitch, or messaged me elsewhere to say my videos helped them get back into playing Star Wars Galaxies. At least 2 of them decided to level an officer themselves after seeing me do it, and one of those 2 even made their officer a Bothan. Base choice. I'm not sure if the series got anybody entirely new to try the game, but if it did for you, let me know in the comments. Let's talk about some more lighthearted aspects of the series, like my least favorite episode. Most would think this is episode 10, where I lost my mind during the Rory legacy, only to then suffer through the introduction of the Meat Lump theme park. While this did suck and was a bummer for me, this at least was a brief problem. The Rory legacy doesn't last more than an hour, and the Meat Lump theme park does have a slow introduction, but you don't have to do many of the aspects about it that I really hate, which is mostly the puzzles. In fact, my least favorite episode is number 42, the one where I did the Nova Orion theme park a second time so I can unlock the V-Wing. As I made it clear in my quest tier list video, Nova Orion is a slog to play through once, let alone twice. There's unforgiving high-level NPCs patrolling around quest points that really love to troll you in the worst possible ways. The quests themselves can be very easy to misunderstand, even if you're an experienced pilot, because you might be tired and out of your mind when you get to them, or maybe you just didn't read it closely enough, or you're just not reading between the lines, who knows. But this leads to a lot of very frustrating and slow restarts on already atop of a miserable story experience. I'm also not a shipwright, so having full access to both Nova and Orion vendors didn't ease the sting as a reward, and I haven't found the motivation to make a proper fit for the V-Wing. The real kicker of this episode, though, was editing it for YouTube. I had to watch myself do everything twice, meaning I effectively experienced everything 4 times. That and editing space videos are more difficult than editing ground content, since at a glance, space looks pretty much the same at all times, so finding key moments to highlight was time-consuming. Fun fact, the unedited length of episode 42 is 4 hours and 10 minutes. I removed about 2 hours and 40 minutes of the footage for the YouTube version. That's about 64% of the recording's total length. This is because most of the space recordings is just me blasting the same looking ships or flying around the same looking areas. So I want to spare you all of that on YouTube because, man, it's definitely not fun to live it. This is unfortunately typical for most of the space-related videos I've uploaded, which might explain why those tend to be the least popular videos that I upload. That and most people go to Star Wars Galaxies for the ground content and not the space content. It is what it is. Let's get into something a little bit more positive now and talk about my favorite episode. First, I want to have an honorable mention to episode 45, Unlocking the Star Viper. This is a very fun quest that's super rewarding, with a quest chain covering ground, space, and group content. It's also original to Legends, so I had a really fun time showing it off to everybody who was watching it. I also got to complete the whole quest with my friend Griffin Striker, and Momo hopped in to help us with Lost Star Destroyer, as we had to get one of the objectives in that group instance for the quest. My favorite episode, though, would be episode 14, Big Hunts and Rage of the Wookiees badge. While editing this episode, I could hear my voice genuine enjoyment with the game. This isn't to say I didn't have fun in the rest of the series, but more so that I had an exceptionally great time with the game this episode. First of all, Kashyyyk is really nostalgic for me as I spent a lot of time there on live, but most of all, the Rage of the Wookiees quest line was way better than I thought it was. As I described in the quest tier list video, the story, in combination with ground, space, and group content again, makes it a really awesome quest chain to do. If the challenge of the Black Scaled Compound was updated to require a group, and quest rewards match the challenge of the quest line, it'd be a perfect Star Wars adventure in SWG as far as I'm concerned. Now, after saying all that, some of you might be thinking, would I do this series a second time, in other words, level another character? No. Doing the exact same thing twice, but with a different character, doesn't sound fun to me. My first alternative would be making a series something like The Quest Path to 90, which the intent of the series would be a step-by-step guide rather than a do-everything playthrough. My goal in this series would be to hit level 90 without outside help from my established alternate characters, so no giving myself armor or weapons, or getting help from other players unless it is a group quest. I definitely take a more optimal path for rewards and playtime in the series. For example, I likely wouldn't do much of the Naboo Legacy, maybe just Kadara to get the ATR team out and then jump out to Corellia afterwards, get to Nims and Susum 60, and then do a little bit more focused approach on getting XP gains so that people could use this guide as a much more, okay, I want to quest to 90 and not have a miserable time. What's a good way to do that? Lastly, I would probably pick a Jedi to do this because not only is that most likely the most common first-time experience for players or returning players, but Jedi also have unique aspects for gearing options that aren't exactly covered in the 1 in 90 series that I did with Vum since she wasn't a Jedi. I would, though, note non-Jedi suggestions over the course of the series at relevant moments, such as, getting armor at level 22, Commandos getting heavy weapons at level 54, and etc. With all that said about the series and my reflections out of the way, let's get to the questions asked by the community. First is Blog, who is asking, how did your views of SWG leveling experience change during the course of the series? Let me start by stating my initial views, and then we'll talk about my current views. My first initial view is that the leveling curve in Star Wars Galaxies is poorly planned. For example, the Tatooine and Naboo Legacy quests were implemented first on live, which got the player to maybe level 40. Legacy content that came later was typically under-leveled, resulting in the player treading XP until Nim's theme park, or they went to Kashyyyk. However, Kashyyyk is also a problem as it spans levels 20 to 85 and doesn't give enough XP to stay on track or any direction where to go on the planet, resulting in players typically getting lost or skipping the planet altogether. My second initial view was that Star Wars Galaxies is entirely absent of story. Now, when I say story, I do not mean lore. The game has plenty of lore. To elaborate, let's give an example of what I mean by lore. In lore, CorSec is the primary law enforcement agency in the Corellian system. However, the beginning story of the CorSec Squadron pilot trainer has the player aiding Sergeant Rhea in defending Corellia's immediate space from pirates, like the Black Sun and Hidden Daggers. This story has characters, namely Sergeant Rhea and the player character, and the mention of potential conflict with pirates. So when I say the story was absent, let me give you an example. Prior to this series, I couldn't tell you the plot of the Legacy quests with any detail beyond we're chasing rare droid parts across Tatooine and Naboo for the Legacy quests. I sincerely do not remember what happens on Corellia, Rory, or anywhere else. I never really remembered any of the quests on Kashyyyk. I did remember Fate of the Galaxy's main beats, but that was only because Obi-Wan shows up. Going on, thinking story was absent in this game is that I didn't think pilot trainers had any story whatsoever. It's just that you're getting odd jobs for them. That's at least how it feels, as my pilot trainer of choice historically has been the Smugglers Alliance, which is just you getting shoved to person who has other work for you to do. My third and final issue that I'm going to go over is that the leveling enjoyment will vary depending on your profession. So for example, I've leveled a lot of commandos from 1 to 90 as they are inherently well equipped for leveling, boasting high survivability, good single and area of effect damage, and good uptime on action use. On the other hand, having leveled a medic from 1 to 90, not once but twice, has been an absolutely terrible experience as medics have low damage, minimal area of effect damage, and will spend a lot of time managing their action. With those initial views set, let's talk about my current views on those three. Going back to the leveling curve, I can certainly say that is definitely poorly planned, which is likely a side effect of the game going through 3 major iterations and then putting in content when it can to fit the current game system. However, the additional base XP rewards on Legends smooths that curve over a little bit. So for example, on Legends, you will outlevel the Legacy quest by the end of Tatooine. However, this means you can pick what content you want to do, like pass over Naboo Legacy for Corellia Legacy, or head straight to Kashyyyk. I think this is a good alternative, rather than restructuring the entire Legacy and XP curve of the game, and I think it's an overall boon for players. If they really want to do underleveled content to experience the story like I did in the series, they're free to do it. Speaking of story, it is actually present in the game. I was wrong, it's not entirely absent, however the quality varies wildly. I'd say that Tansari Point Station through the Corellia Legacy has an okay story with mostly reasonable characters. The gameplay is good, minus Naboo overstaying its welcome for a period of time. The story declines in line with the gameplay though once you hit the Talos section of the Legacy. Specifically, the last arc of Talos involves genocide spiders. This narrative felt like someone's first draft, which was reflected in the repetition of visiting samey campsites and caves for 2 hours. The story quality in Legacy falls off entirely by Rory though, as the writing and quest locations feel like they only made it to the outlining stage. The plot is painfully boring and movie Star Wars characters are wasted in their strange appearances at nearly empty bases and campsites. Also, having the first part of the Meat Lump theme park as a requirement to continuing the Legacy quests after Rory is actually evil and only filters players out of ever finishing Legacy. Despite all of this though, my least favorite story is actually the Nova Orion Station questline. I know, big surprise. If Rory was an outline, the Nova Orion story was copied off a dirty napkin. The characters are ridiculous, the dialogue is often delivered plainly and straight by characters, and there being an option to pick a side makes no sense when the story is exactly the same, with the exception that they flip the names around in the script to accurately reflect who you sided against. Space isn't all bad though, as my favorite story in the 1 to 90 series was the pilot trainer series for Storm Squadron. Not only did it bridge events that happened between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, but you encounter a variety of believable members of the Empire. Low-ranking officers jockeying for promotion, middle-ranking officers trying to keep their rank, pragmatic veteran pilots, and high-minded admirals. Too bad I'm now allergic to A-Wings as a result of the space missions themselves, though. Third, leveling enjoyment definitely varies by profession. I never leveled an officer before, but it was a great time as I had 2 big movement speed increases, major area of effect damage, and unlimited action once I made it to level 85 and equipped a really enjoy. If my character was any slower in combat or between quests, I'm sure I would have had a more negative review of travel-heavy sections of the game, like crossing Kashyyyk repeatedly. If you plan to level a character to 90 via questing, I definitely add Officer to the Jedi and Commando recommendations. As for the other professions, Spy has okay movement and high survivability, but little on offer for area of effect damage, which saves a lot of time with killing quest NPCs. Smuggler has more area of effect damage, but struggles with maintaining action and is squishier, leading to longer breaks between fights. Bounty Hunter has great survivability and good movement with power-assisted sprint, but they have lower overall damage, and Flamejet is the only strong instant AoE in their kit. Do not level as Medic. Not even with a pet. They have no movement increases, hardly any damage, their only AoE is a damage over time effect, and you'll be action broke all of the time. If you want to play Medic, hit 90 doing literally anything else first. Thanks for that question, blog. I had a really fun time thinking about the differences between my views then and now. Our second question comes from Griffin Striker, who asks, knowing how many hours you've put in before and will likely put in after this series into the game, How are your overall feelings on the longevity of the game for you personally and in general? This was a very difficult question to answer and it took me a while to formulate my thoughts, but let me address the longevity in general before me personally, as that'll kind of help inform where I'm coming from. So the longevity in general for Star Wars Galaxies, not just SWG, is more of a broader statement on the early 2000s MMOs in general, and I still feel like they have life left in them for a while. This is namely because sandbox games are still a very popular genre, and no recent MMOs have been able to capitalize on sandbox systems like the ones found in Star Wars Galaxies, EverQuest, and other MMOs from that late 90s to 2000s era. Star Wars Galaxies, though, offers a Star Wars experience unlike any other Star Wars game, which is something that it has up over these other games. Namely, Star Wars The Old Republic offers a more cinematic experience, but I never felt part of the world like I have in Star Wars Galaxies. This is likely because of those sandbox mechanics, such as placing a house in the game, running your own shop and vendor, things like to that effect. Other Star Wars games are great, and there's many that I love, and there's some ones that I'm looking forward to in the future, but they don't offer the same kind of community that MMOs can, thus they don't offer the same thing that Star Wars Galaxies can. Lastly, what really helps Star Wars Galaxies in this section, though, is that it has a very large and active emulator scene. If SWG Legends isn't for you, then there is probably another SWG emulator you'll enjoy. Or you can play on multiple emulators at once. You don't have to lock yourself into one at a time. Other closed online game communities struggle to gain the kind of interest in Star Wars Galaxies has. For example, I played Phantasy Star Universe for a while with Griffin on the Clementine server, and while we had a lot of fun, I think that server peaked at like 150 people during a server seasonal event. It typically caps around 50 live players at peak hours. They would die for the amount of attention SWG Legends gets, let alone the entire SWG emulator scene. I think SWG's greatest challenge for longevity in general, though, is bringing in and retaining new players. Most new players I've talked to have previous experience with the game, whether that is seeing it when they were younger growing up or having played it before. Discoverability for the game or specific emulator communities seems to be a challenge. Maybe that's a side effect of having so many emulator options. It's overwhelming or confusing people. Not to mention, there's 3 drastically different versions of the game, which can be confusing for new players, with pre-CU, CU, and NGE all being options these days. On that topic, Star Wars Galaxies has never had a kind learning curve, which tends to deter people. For example, the Toontown Online emulator community seems to attract and retain new players better overall. There are lots of people sharing the game and their experiences with friends or online communities, which helps keep eyes on the projects, not to mention the game itself is just simple and easier to pick up and play. Star Wars Galaxies needs better in-game tutorials and directions. Outside guides like mine are great, but some players will never opt to even search for them, especially for basic things the game should teach them. In fact, here are some examples of basic mechanics with no in-game guidance. Droid commands for jump to lightspeed are never naturally introduced to a player. They are just mentioned to exist in the ship tutorial window and by a card-ass pilot trainer in Tansari. Leveling a trader in a non-miserable way is purely community knowledge. In other words, that structured trader pipeline is not talked about anywhere. Crafting for Gendra will not get him to tell you, you're doing it wrong, kid, go be structures. Getting buffed by an entertainer is just not introduced, and it's a core aspect of not just leveling, but playing the game in general. Getting an entertainer buff is typically only found in guides or when other people ask you, why don't you have an entertainer buff? Manual versus auto-aim toggle NGE is miserable. Please, devs, default this to auto-aim and unbind the toggle key by default. I see streamers new to the game struggle with this all of the time. The Starship terminal is never tutorialized, like the travel feature. It's not communicated well. I've seen people successfully find and get their ship only to always click the launch, hyperspace, then land at stations manually. My dream, though, is for the Bazaar terminal to have like a tooltip walkthrough on the UI, but I know UI stuff is hard and not fun, so I'll keep dreaming on that one. With that out of the way, let's talk about longevity for me personally. As an active game, it'll go until I reach my goals or burn out on them. My current in-game focus is the Badge Collector series, but I'm starting to get into some pretty nasty badges, so we'll see how far I make. SWG will always be a game I return to or keep checking in on occasionally. This is largely due to in-game ownership emotions, specifically mayoring a city, running my player vendors, or just making sure my houses don't get packed up. Lately, I've been able to play more with guild members though, which definitely motivates me to stick around too. To that extent, SWG's limits as a game for me are its community. If there are people to play with, then I'll keep playing. If there aren't, then there isn't anything for me to do. SWG is a community game at the start and end of the day. For example, PvP hasn't been active during my usual play sessions, and the last few times I went out on my way to participate, it hasn't been fun for me, so I'm not prioritizing getting out and PvPing right now. However, PvE has been more fun for me lately as people have joined my community who play in similar time zones, so we've been able to quest, do endgame stuff, and vibe at events together, which has been a great experience. Thank you again to Griffin Striker for that very interesting and difficult question. I had a fun time chewing that one over. Our third question comes from the SWG Legends staff themselves, who asks on Twitter, what was something new you learned while going through the series? My first reaction was officer quirks. Specifically, training advanced tactics in the second expertise tree can happen at level 10, where a character might not have a large enough action pool to use the latest rank of the buff. Without at least Favor the Elders, I wouldn't have been able to activate the buff at level 10, which isn't a big deal because you can get medic buffs or just upgrade your gear to have more con or stamina, but I still think it's funny. My second officer quirk I want to talk about is that they don't get a third offensive special ability until level 38, which is their first AoE core bomb. Sure, you can get Decapitate or Overcharge in the first expertise tree sooner, but I don't think it's worth putting off Charge and Scatter in the second tree given the amount of running you do while questing. It isn't like you're going to be overflowing with action anyway, since Sure Shot and Paint Target have a short cooldown timers, so effectively your rotation is just 2 buttons for 38 levels, that's all. I also learned some fun quest facts while leveling. For Secrets of the Sirens, someone let me know that you don't actually need to deactivate the shields to defeat Calhandro at the end of the quest chain. If you're an ace pilot or have a solid loadout in the late tiers of piloting, you could just defeat him. The shield from the base just makes him harder to kill, not invincible. I also learned something about the Karatamba quests on Kashyyyk. In the Dead Forests, you can side with the outcasts if you kill Warwatu, the arena champion. I never knew that was the decisive moment until the series prompted me to look into it, since narratively, the tribe doesn't indicate that killing the champion will result in a punishment. I also did try to side with the outcast by talking to literally every outcast NPC before going through with the Karatamba, but I couldn't figure it out. I didn't think I had to kill the Wookiee champion to do it. Maybe if I make it a second character or do that quest line again, I'll do it the other way just to see what it's like, but that's not high on my things list to do. The last thing I learned was that officers can get through a lot of content on their own, surprisingly. If I switched my build or maybe just collected some more buff items, I probably could have gotten through a few more fights alone, like the Black Sun Assassin fight during the first stretch of the Bespin quests. Officers' damage over time cleanse, debuff boosts, group buffs, and emergency shields make for a surprisingly durable kit, especially if you're running a melee weapon which allows you to parry melee attacks. But thank you very much for the question, Steph. Our last question comes from us via YouTube, thanks to SMS Corks89. I don't know if I said that right, but thank you for your question. They ask, you obviously have played much of the game I have yet to experience. I've been stuck on the Meat Lump theme park for weeks trying to get all the collection items. I doubt you'd go through the trouble of doing the same, but what content is there that you haven't done yet could we expect as videos or streams in the future? This is a great question. There's actually a lot lined up for the future. So specifically for the 1 in 90 series, you can expect an Ewok Festival of Love video like I did for the other seasonal events. I know I talked about it in one of the videos briefly at the beginning, but I want to do a full video on it like I have for the others. Any new quests the Legend staff add will also likely get a video. So for example, I know they're working on a new version of the Marauder theme park, so I'll likely do a video for that when it releases. Should I get around to doing the Ace of Aces badges, I'll likely record and upload all of the Pilot Trainer quest lines so everyone can experience those stories and quests along with me as well. Speaking of badge hunting though, the Badge Collector series will continue on Twitch. YouTube videos for the series will likely move to a shorter length though, something that's like a recap format where I occasionally post updates of how the achievement hunt is going. Something like, I've completed these things in Quarantine Zone and here are the tips for those badges. This is because the badges are starting to get really difficult or they're just too short on their own to nicely put into a package. I don't really think anyone needs to see me running around Dantooine for 15 hours looking for 75 Grawl Marauders to kill, so I think a summary on that one's effective. Official and community events will continue to be uploaded to the channel in general though. I plan to broadcast on Twitch the upcoming Server Best Pilots PvP event, which will be on February 1st. It'll be a 4 versus 4 format instead of the 3v3. An edited down version of that broadcast will be available on YouTube like the last time, so if you haven't checked out the 3v3 one yet, check that out now, so you can be ready for the 4v4 event that's upcoming soon. Guides will keep coming to YouTube for Star Wars Galaxies Legends as well. There is one guide that has been in production for a while and will be the longest guide I've ever made. It will likely stay the longest guide, as I don't want to make one that's an hour long again. After that guide is released, I have a few more, hopefully shorter guides I like to make and release as well. Updates on Legends news and content will continue as they happen. The server has received updates since my last video dedicated to patch notes, but they've been generally smaller additions added alongside the seasonal events. There are highlights on my Twitch channel covering those smaller updates, and maybe I'll do a roundup of those patches or something as a video for YouTube later. Lastly, I hope to upload a greater variety of videos this year. Think of videos like the quest tier list video, the trader leveling speedrun, the city expertise analysis, or videos like this one. If you made it this far through the video, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you for your support once again, my subscribers, followers on Twitch, my YouTube members, and my Twitch subs. Anything and everything's very appreciated, and I hope for a great 2025 for you all. Have a good one, and stay hungry.